learning, we can think about spaces and the permissions that exist within those spaces. When we're looking at scaffolded social learning, we're in a semi-formal space. It's not very formal, but neither is it fully social. It's halfway between the two. And within that, we can consider what permission exists. Are we giving people permission to say anything they like, or are we going to hold some walls around the edges? Are we going to put some rules in place about what things are acceptable and which things aren't acceptable? What we often find is that when people move into social learning environments, they will make assumptions about what permission exists. If they don't think they have great permission to share their own knowledge and wisdom, they may not share enough, and you'll end up with a community where people don't say very much at all, or worse, they just say the things they think they're supposed to say. For social learning to really work, we have to make a community where people feel comfortable and safe to claim a permission to share those things that we need to hear. So we need to be very clear about the rules. We need to think very carefully about not just the space, but the permission that exists within it. And we have to be ready to support those people who aren't clear on the rules, but also to support people who may accidentally share too much, who may misunderstand the permission that exists. So our role becomes to keep people safe. In a global context, we need to consider culturally specific aspects of permission. So for example, in different parts of the world, we find that men and women have different rights and a different strength to their voice. Now, social technology can bring people together in one space, but it doesn't address the underlying permission that exists. So we can find that people will bring their everyday cultural assumptions into that shared space. That may mean that some people will keep quiet because they have an expectation that they should keep quiet, but it may also mean that some people will express thoughts or feelings which may seem inappropriate to people who come from a different culture. One thing to always hold in mind is our responsibility to help people understand what's happening in these spaces and to keep them safe within those spaces as they go through it. Sometimes we ask the question, who gives permission? But there are two types of permission. There's a permission that's given and there's a permission that's claimed. So when we're designing learning, we can give people permission. We can say what it's okay for them to talk about. But we have to remember that in these social learning communities, people will quite often claim a permission to talk about things they want to talk about. So it's very important in our learning design that we consider how we will deal with that. If we just say to people, no, you mustn't talk about that, we didn't give you permission, then we're guilty of not listening to what the community wants to talk about. Certainly there will be times when we have to stop conversations, but very often an important part of social learning is to listen to the permission that's claimed, to the conversations that the community wants to have. One thing that you can think about is the rules that exist, and to make a decision how many of the rules you will write and how many we will allow the community to write. It can be really interesting to co-create the rules for a learning community. So for example, we may go in and say, one rule that we bring is that you can never be rude to somebody else in this community. We have a certain expectation of the standards that we will hold with each other. But we may ask the community to decide how they will deal with the moderation of that community. So we bring one rule into the system, but we ask the community to write a version for moderation. so we can listen to the rules the community wants to write, as well as bringing in our own. It doesn't mean that we have to adopt all those rules, but we do often find that if you co-create the rules, if you at least create space to listen to the rules that people want, then people are more likely to engage because they will feel some ownership over the space that they're in.